In this video, I'm going to talk about the content of the results section. The results section is the third major part of your research paper, and it's probably the most important part because it contains the actual facts of your experiment. The other sections contain your plans, hopes, and interpretations, but the results section is the actual truth of your study. Basically, the results section explains any problems you have with your data collection, the main result of the experiment, and any other interesting trends in the data. And again, the results section should only contain the facts of your experiment. Don't write your interpretation of the data here. Interpretation of the meaning of the results is done in the discussion section. In the results, we want to convey our data in the most accessible way, so we usually use visual elements like tables and graphs to make it easier to understand the data. There are two main types of visual elements: figures and tables. Let's look at tables first. Tables have the label at the top, and they're labeled Table 1, Table 2, and so on. And they also have a title. It's good if you can put the independent variable conditions on the left side vertically and the things you measured horizontally, so that you can easily compare the measurements across the categories. But you need to decide for each table you make what's the easiest to understand and what fits on the paper. This is a figure. All graphs, photographs, and diagrams are figures. Basically, anything that is not a table is a figure. In the case of figures, the label comes below and is called Figure 1, Figure 2, and so on. In graphs, the independent variable is the x-axis and the dependent variable is the y-axis. But if you look at something changing over time, then the x-axis is time, and the independent variable are different colors or shapes. But the dependent variable is still the y-axis. Now there are many different types of graphs you can use to show your results. This is a line graph. This is a bar graph. Here is a scatter plot. Here's another line graph, this time with colors. This is a box and whiskers plot. And this is a histogram. Tables are good for showing the exact values or showing a lot of different information in one place. But graphs are good for showing overall trends and are much easier to understand quickly. It also depends on your data. In general, continuous variables like temperature, growth, pH, age, time, these tend to be better displayed on line graphs or scatter plots or maybe histograms. Categorical variables like men versus women or different chemicals, these tend to be better displayed in bar graphs or tables. In any case, you need to decide which is the best for each particular example you have. Never put a graph and a table with the same data in your paper. Okay, let's look at an example of a results section. This is a research paper about the effect of different kinds of sound on the behavior of gorillas in the zoo. And here is the table of the results. We can see that there are 3 different conditions that are being compared and 8 different behaviors that were measured. These numbers are the average number of each behavior, the mean, during a period of 10 days for each condition, observed for 4 hours a day. And the numbers in parentheses represent the standard error. We can see that none of the p-values are less than 0.05, so none of the results are significant in this particular study. Now let's look at the text. Notice that they start with the paragraph, not with the table. First, they explain the main result. Notice that there are no significant results. This is not really surprising since there's only 6 gorillas. But they can still explain the interesting trends in the data. In fact, they explain the main trends of all 8 behaviors that are included in the study. So here we see the animals tended to spend more of their time resting and sitting during the ecologically relevant, and in particular the ecologically non-relevant conditions. So all 8 of these behaviors that are shown in the table are mentioned in the sentence, basically explaining what the differences are. So here's resting, here's sitting, here is the social interactions, moving, standing, auto-grooming, aggressive behavior, abnormal. Okay, so all 8 of these are mentioned. In the table, you can see the details of the particular numbers, but in the sentences, they just explain, for example, that these conditions encouraged more social interactions and less moving and standing. They have a few numbers here, like where they say that aggressive behaviors were reduced by more than 50%. But most of the time, they just refer instead to the table. They tell you what the main difference is and then say, look at the table for the details. Okay, let's look at another example. This is a paper that compares green tea, black tea, and black tea with milk by measuring the catechin levels in the blood of 12 people after drinking the tea. And here's the results section. In this case, the results section starts by explaining the problems they had collecting the data. 3 of the volunteers got stomach aches from drinking black tea, so they compared the results with and without those 3 subjects, and since they found no difference, they decided to keep that data in with all the results. Next, they mentioned the tables and figures. Okay, figure 1 shows, and then here they explain the main result. After that, they explain other interesting relationships in the data. Okay, the time to reach maximum concentration was not different for green and black tea, whereas the rate of elimination of catechins from blood was significantly higher after consumption of green tea as compared to black tea. Notice that not only things that were different were mentioned, like this significantly higher one, but also things that did not change. Okay, it was not different. Same thing down here. Okay, had no effect on the total catechin levels. Okay, and in the case of this results section, they have a table 1. Okay, they have figure 1, and they also have table 2, and those are shown later on. Here's table 1, here's the figure. Okay, where you can see that green tea is different than black tea and black tea with milk. Okay. And here's a table that summarizes the main differences in the main results of the data. Okay, so let's just go over the organization of the results section. Start with a paragraph, not a table or a figure, and make sure you show the tables and figures after they're mentioned in the text. Also, at the beginning of the results section, you should explain any missing data or problems you had collecting the data, and then explain the main result and address your hypothesis. And after that, explain all other interesting trends, anything else that might be interesting to readers in the data. Okay, finally, let's go over some common mistakes for the results section. Okay, first, don't include raw data. For example, in the case of the gorillas, this is the raw data. It has the data for each of the 6 gorillas. Readers can't understand this without doing the math themselves. And the purpose of the experiment is to compare gorillas in general between those 3 conditions. We're not interested in comparing individual gorillas. Individuals will always be different. That's why we use statistics. Now we want to know what gorillas generally do. If one gorilla was especially different, we might mention that in a sentence. But remember that you need to make your graphs and tables easy to understand. This is not easy to understand. Readers want to be able to check your conclusions and your interpretations, but they don't want to repeat your calculations. Okay, next. Don't just tell the reader to look at a table or a figure and figure it out for themselves, like this. The results are shown in the following tables and graphs. Next, don't describe your figures or tables in too much detail in the sentences. This is hard to read. Take a look at this example. I'm not going to read it. You can look at it. But it would be much easier to just look at a graph of this. Okay, finally, don't talk about the figures in the sentences like this. Instead, talk about the subjects. In this case, talk about gorillas. Don't talk about tables, or don't say according to table 1. Table 1's not the source of the information. It just displays the information.